Mom, we're doing Thanksgiving at Kevin's parents' place this year. It's just easier. You know how it is. I held the phone against my ear for a moment longer than I needed to, the way you do when you're waiting to see if there's more. There wasn't. My daughter, Elaine, had said what she called to say. She was waiting for me to make it easy for her. Of course, I said. That makes sense. You're the best mom. We'll call you. She hung up before I could ask what time they'd call, or whether they were coming by beforehand, or whether the kids wanted to stop in for even an hour. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter next to the mixing bowl I'd already pulled out. I'd been planning to make my sweet potato casserole that morning, the one with the brown sugar and pecans on top that my daughter had requested every single Thanksgiving since she was 9 years old. I stood there looking at that bowl for a long time. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the leaves. A car door slammed. Regular Tuesday sounds. I put the bowl back in the cabinet. My name is Frances. I'm 68 years old and I have lived in the same house in Raleigh, North Carolina for 31 years. My late husband, Roy, and I bought it the year Elaine started kindergarten. We painted the front door red because Roy said it would make the house look like it was happy to see people coming. He died 6 years ago this past March. I still haven't painted the door a different color. I don't plan to. I want to be honest with you, because if I'm going to tell this story, I'm going to tell it straight. My daughter is not a bad person. I believe that fully. She's busy. She's pulled in 12 directions at once, and her husband's family has a way of making everyone feel like guests at their own lives. Kevin is polite to me in the way that people are polite to someone they don't entirely know what to do with. He shakes my hand. He says, "Great to see you, Frances," with a real feeling, I think. But somewhere over the past few years, there's been a quiet rearrangement, the kind that happens without anyone announcing it. I went from being included to being informed, not asked, informed, as in, here is what we decided, and we hope you understand, and we know you will, because you always do. I always did. The week before Thanksgiving, I went ahead with the shopping anyway. I don't know what I was thinking. I think part of me expected Elaine to call back and say they'd changed their minds, or that they'd stop by for dessert at least. So I bought a small turkey breast, the ingredients for the casserole, a can of cranberry sauce because my grandson Trevor loves it straight from the can and thinks that's hilarious. I bought a little pumpkin pie from the bakery section at Harris Teeter because my granddaughter Lily always picks the filling out and leaves the crust, and I find that deeply charming. I didn't hear from Elaine again that week. I went through the motions. Cleaned the house, even though no one was coming. Set the table, then looked at it, then folded the extra placemats back up and put them away. I cooked the sweet potato casserole on Wednesday evening alone in my kitchen, listening to the radio because the silence was the kind that takes up space. The food sat in the refrigerator. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up the way I always do, early, before the sun is fully up. 30 years of early mornings, first for school buses, then for Roy's coffee, then just out of habit. The house smelled like nothing. That was the detail that got me. Thanksgiving morning should smell like something. It should smell like butter and sage and the particular sweetness of a kitchen that's been working. Instead, it just smelled like a house. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I want to tell you something I haven't said out loud to anyone. Sitting there that morning, I wasn't sad exactly. It was something colder than sadness. It was clarity. The kind that sneaks up on you after you've spent a long time choosing not to look directly at something. I thought about the last 4 years, how the visits had gotten shorter, how I'd stopped suggesting that Elaine bring the kids for a weekend because the answer was always, "We'll try," and trying had stopped happening somewhere around 2021. How I'd started texting instead of calling because calling felt like interrupting. How I'd made myself smaller and quieter and more convenient because I thought that was what you did. I thought it was generosity. I pulled out the box I keep at the back of my hall closet. Roy called it the evidence box, half joking. It's where I put things I wasn't ready to throw away, but didn't want to look at every day. I sat on the floor and went through it. There was a card Elaine had made me in 3rd grade. Crayon hearts and a spelling mistake I never corrected her on. A photo from her college graduation, Roy with his arm around her, both of them squinting into the sun. A napkin from her wedding with a note she'd pressed into my hand that said, "I wouldn't be here without you, Mom. I mean that." I saved it because I believed her when she said it. I still do, actually. I think she meant it then. People change without meaning to. They get absorbed into new orbits, and suddenly you're a moon circling a planet that's circling another planet, and the distance just grows without anyone deciding it. There was a photo of me from some Christmas 5 or 6 years ago in the background, smiling, holding a plate. It took me a moment to place myself in it. I was off to the side. I was always off to the side. I put everything back in the box and sat there on the floor for a while. Then I got up, put on real shoes, and went to the refrigerator. The sweet potato casserole was still there, covered in foil, perfectly made and untouched. I stood there looking at it, the way you look at something you've put a lot of yourself into. Then I took it out, put on my coat, and drove 6 blocks to the First Presbyterian Church. They do a community Thanksgiving dinner every year. I donated money to it for years. Written a check, dropped it in the envelope, felt like I'd done something. But I'd never gone. I stood in the parking lot for a moment with my casserole and my pie and the turkey breast I'd sliced and arranged on a platter the night before, because apparently I cannot stop feeding people even when no one's coming to be fed. A young man held the door open for me. Inside it was warm and loud and smelled exactly like Thanksgiving. Long folding tables, families mixed up with people who'd come alone, volunteers in paper aprons carrying trays. A woman about my age was arranging rolls in a basket with the focused expression of someone who takes rolls seriously. I understood her immediately. I set my things down at the food table. A volunteer named Sandra, who had the kind of face that made you feel like she'd already heard everything and wasn't going to judge any of it, thanked me and asked if I wanted to stay and help serve. "I don't have anywhere to be," I said. It came out more honest than I intended. She handed me an apron. I served sweet potato casserole for 2.5 hours. I watched a man in his 80s eat 3 helpings and tell me it tasted like his mother's. I watched a little girl try to stack cranberry sauce on a roll and fail and not care at all. I watched a woman sitting alone at the end of a table look up when someone sat down next to her, and the way her face changed. Just slightly. Just enough. I drove home in the early evening. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the pressurized kind, not the kind that felt like a held breath. Just stillness. My phone had 2 missed calls from Elaine. 1 voicemail. I played it. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you had a good day. We're at Kevin's mom's. It's been kind of hectic, but good. The kids miss you. Give us a call when you get a chance." I played it again. Then I set the phone down and went and made myself tea. "The kids miss you." She said it like information, not like something that needed addressing. Like she was passing along a message from a third party. I didn't call back that night. What happened next, I did quietly. I didn't make announcements. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just started making decisions the same way I'd been making concessions for years. One at a time, small, steady. The first decision was about the beach house. Roy and I bought a small cottage in Emerald Isle about 15 years ago. It was never fancy. 3 bedrooms, a porch that needed repainting, a kitchen with a drawer that stuck. But it was on the water, and in summer it was beautiful in the uncomplicated way that water is beautiful. After Roy died, I'd kept paying for it because Elaine's family used it every July. Kevin called it our place at the beach. I remember the first time I heard him say that. I didn't correct him. I told myself it was generosity. They had never once asked if I wanted to come. I called my attorney after Thanksgiving. Her name is Margaret. She's been my attorney since Roy and I bought our first house, and she has a particular way of listening that makes you feel like you're the only sensible person who's ever sat across from her desk. I told her I wanted to update my estate documents. I wanted the beach cottage removed from the portion of my estate designated for Elaine and Kevin. I wanted it left instead to a land trust I'd been reading about, one that worked to keep coastal properties accessible for lower-income families. Margaret listened. Then she said, "Is this something you've been thinking about for a while, or something that happened recently?" "Both," I said. She nodded and started writing. I also removed Kevin's name from the emergency contact on my bank accounts. He'd been added years ago at Elaine's suggestion for practicality, in case something happened to me. I understood the logic, but Kevin had never once called to check in on me. Not on my birthday. Not after Roy died. Not after my hip surgery 2 years ago that Elaine had mentioned to him, and he'd sent a very nice flower arrangement. And nothing else. An emergency contact should be someone who would notice if there was an emergency. I called my neighbor instead. Her name is Harriet. She's 72. She moved in 3 years ago after her own husband passed, and she has brought me soup twice without being asked, which I have decided is the benchmark for trustworthiness. I didn't tell Elaine any of this right away. I wasn't trying to punish her. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I wasn't sitting in my house plotting. I was just finally doing what Roy had told me to do years before he died. He'd said, "Frances, stop arranging your life around people who haven't arranged theirs around you." I thought he was being uncharitable. He wasn't. He was just seeing things earlier than I was. Elaine called the following Sunday. We had a normal conversation. She told me about Thanksgiving, about something funny Trevor said at the table, about Lily's new obsession with a book series I'd never heard of. I listened and asked questions and laughed in the right places. It was fine. It was the kind of fine that is comfortable and thin, the kind you can press your thumb through if you press hard enough. She didn't ask about my Thanksgiving. I didn't offer. December came, and with it, Christmas. Elaine texted me in the first week to let me know they'd be spending Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in Charlotte at Kevin's parents' house. She said it like she was letting me know about a weather forecast. Informational. She added that we could do our Christmas the weekend before, if that worked. I looked at my phone for a moment. I thought about the Christmas stockings I'd sewn by hand the year each grandchild was born. Trevor's had a little train on it because he'd been obsessed with trains at age 2. Lily's had a star because she pointed at the sky the first time she'd ever seen stars and said, "Mine," with complete conviction, and I'd never forgotten it. I texted back, "That sounds fine. Let me know the date." Then I went to my craft room, where I keep things in boxes on labeled shelves, and I found the bags of gifts I'd been slowly collecting since October. Books for Trevor, a set of watercolor paints for Lily, a cashmere scarf for Elaine in a shade of green that matched her eyes, a bottle of bourbon for Kevin because it's the one gift I know he'll use. I sat with those bags. I thought about the beach house. I thought about Thanksgiving. I thought about every time I'd made myself smaller to fit into a space that kept getting smaller. I thought about the napkin from Elaine's wedding. Then I put the bags at the back of the craft room shelf and closed the door. The weekend before Christmas they came. Kevin and Elaine and Trevor and Lily for approximately 4 hours, which included lunch. Kevin spent most of it on his phone. Elaine was warm, genuinely warm, the way she gets when she's a little guilty about something and overcorrects. Trevor had grown 3 inches since I'd last seen him and was at the age where he didn't know what to do with his hands. Lily climbed into my lap without asking permission, the way she always has, and I held her there longer than usual. I didn't bring out the gifts. Elaine noticed eventually. "Mom, are you giving the kids something?" "I'm still deciding," I said. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. A little confused, a little cautious. Kevin didn't look up from his phone. They left before dark. Lily waved at me from the back window of the car. I waved back until I couldn't see the car anymore. Then I went inside. I took the bags out of the craft room and put them on the kitchen table, and I sat with them again. This time I knew what I was going to do with them. I just needed a minute to stop being sad about it. I kept Lily's watercolors. I wrapped them in plain paper and wrote her name on it and set it aside. Lily would get her gift. Lily had done nothing except be 7 years old and loving, and children should not be held responsible for the choices of adults. The rest I repackaged. I found a local organization that collects holiday gifts for kids whose families are dealing with housing instability. I drove over the following morning with Trevor's books and a handful of other things I added from around the house. The cashmere scarf for Elaine I folded carefully back into its tissue paper. I would return it. I hadn't decided yet whether I'd tell her why. The bourbon I put in the back of my pantry for Harriet's birthday. She deserved something good. That same week, I called Roy's youngest sister, my sister-in-law Bet, who lives in Asheville and who I'd let drift to birthday cards and the occasional text because I'd been so focused on being available for Elaine that I'd let everyone else go quiet. Bet picked up on the second ring, and we talked for an hour and 40 minutes, and at some point I was laughing about something and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed that freely. I started making a list, not a complaint list, not a grievance, just names, people who had shown up in small ways I'd failed to notice because I was always looking past them toward the people who weren't showing up. Harriet with her soup. My friend June from the library board, who texted me articles she thought I'd like and never expected a quick response. My former colleague Diane, who had called me every week for a month after Roy died, and who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years because I let the calls taper off and didn't restart them. I wrote them all down. Christmas came and went. Elaine called from Charlotte. A quick call, warm enough, full of background noise, and Kevin's family in the other room. She said the kids loved their gifts. I asked what Lily had gotten from me, and there was a brief pause, and Elaine said, "Oh, I think we have something from you under the tree, Mom." She didn't know about the watercolors. I'd mailed them directly to Lily with a card that said, "For you, because you always see things worth seeing." Lily called me herself 2 days later to tell me she'd already used up half the yellow. I spent Christmas Day with Harriet. She came over with a bottle of wine and a store-bought pie she described as ambitious for what it is, and we sat at my dining room table and talked for 4 hours. She'd been a school librarian for 30 years. She knew more interesting things about more topics than almost anyone I'd ever met, and I had been neighborly to her for 3 years without ever sitting down and actually talking to her. I felt something shift that evening. Not dramatically, just a quiet internal rearrangement, the mirror image of the one that had been happening to me for years without my noticing. January came. Elaine called more than she had in a while. I wasn't sure if she'd sensed something or whether it was coincidence. We talked about the kids, about a show we'd both been watching, about a recipe she was trying. It was good. I let it be good without reading too much into it. She mentioned the beach house once, casually, asking if I'd thought about what to do with it in the long run. I said I'd handled it. She paused. Handled it how? I updated my estate plan, I said. It's been taken care of. Another pause. Oh, do you want to talk about it? Not particularly, I said, but everything's in order. You don't need to worry. She didn't push. I didn't volunteer anything else. We moved on to the show we'd both been watching, and the conversation ended warmly, the way our conversations often do on the surface. I don't know what happens next with Elaine and me. I genuinely don't. I think there's still love there, real love, the kind that doesn't disappear just because people get lazy with it. I think she might surprise me one day. I hope she does. I'm not closed to it, but I've stopped arranging my life around the hope of it. That's the difference. A few weeks into January, I drove Lily's card to the post office. Late. I know, she'd already called about the paints. And on the way back, I stopped at the church where I'd served food on Thanksgiving. Sandra was there, doing some kind of inventory in the side room. She remembered me. The sweet potato casserole woman, she said. That's me, I said. I asked if they needed regular volunteers. She said yes, they always did, and handed me a sign-up sheet, and I put my name on 3 Saturdays. That was a month ago. I've been back twice. Last week, a man named Gerald, who must be close to my age and has the most precise opinions about proper cornbread I have ever encountered, started telling me about a book he'd read, and we stood in the kitchen of that church for 20 minutes debating it, and I thought, this is what I was missing. Not grand gestures, not reconciliation scenes, just people who had time for each other. There's a birthday card Lily drew for me. It's on my refrigerator. She used the new watercolors, and it's a house with yellow windows and my name written in purple at the top. And at the bottom, she wrote, "You always make things feel warmer." I read it most mornings when I get my coffee. That's the thing about children. They name what adults have learned to talk around. I don't have an ending that resolves everything neatly, because that's not how it went. Elaine and I are still finding our way. The beach house has been donated. The gifts that were meant for people who never asked how I spent Thanksgiving went to people who needed them. My Saturday mornings now have somewhere to be. I am not smaller than I was. I think I might actually be larger, in the ways that matter, in the ways Roy would have recognized. I take up more space in my own life. I say yes to the people who show up, and I am slowly, deliberately, building something out of the relationships I'd let go quiet. If you've ever made a casserole for people who didn't come, if you've ever stood in your own kitchen on a holiday morning wondering how you became optional, if you've ever waited for a call that only came when something was needed, you already understand everything I've said here. You were never the backup plan. You were always the thing worth showing up for. Someone just forgot to tell you that you were allowed to stop waiting at the door. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. And what I keep coming back to is this. The way things end up is almost never an accident. For years, I did what I thought a good mother did. I showed up. I wrote the checks. I drove the casseroles across town. I made myself available and easy and undemanding because I believed that was what love looked like in practice. But somewhere along the way, I confused being generous with being invisible. And the truth is, when you make it too easy for people to take you for granted, most people will. Not out of cruelty. Elaine is not cruel. But because we are all, every one of us, capable of drifting toward comfort if nothing pulls us back. What I didn't understand for too long is that there's a difference between giving from a full place and giving from a fearful one. When I kept the beach house in Elaine's name, kept Kevin on my accounts, kept making the casserole nobody was coming to eat, I wasn't being loving. I was being afraid. Afraid that if I stopped, I would lose whatever thin thread still connected us. That fear made me smaller. It made me easier to overlook. The decision to stop wasn't anger. I want to be honest about that. It was clarity. It was the kind of clear-eyed recognition that comes when you finally stop explaining away what you've been seeing for years. And that recognition took real courage to sit with, because it would have been so much easier to just make the call, accept the apology when it came, and go back to the way things were. Easier and smaller and lonelier. What changed me was not the beach house or the estate documents, or even the Thanksgiving casserole I served to strangers. What changed me was Harriet at my kitchen table for 4 hours, and Gerald in the church kitchen with his opinions about cornbread, and Lily's watercolor card on my refrigerator. What changed me was the realization that I had been so focused on one door that I hadn't noticed all the others standing open. Good character, I think, isn't just about how we treat the people who treat us well. It's about being honest enough with ourselves to recognize when we've been enabling something that doesn't serve anyone, including the person we're trying to protect. Elaine was not made better by my endless accommodation. I was made smaller by it. That's not a trade worth making, and it takes a particular kind of wisdom. The slow, hard-won kind. To understand that what you withhold can sometimes be more loving than what you give. Not as punishment, as truth. As a mirror held up that says, "This is what it looks like when I stop pretending everything is fine." I'm still Frances. I still make the casserole. I still save the cards Lily sends me. But I make the casserole for people who show up. And I save the cards because they're real, not because I'm waiting to be remembered. That's the whole lesson, I think. You don't have to disappear to matter less to someone who was already looking past you. But you do have to decide, at some point, that your presence is worth something, worth protecting, worth offering only to those who can see it. That decision is not easy. It is not comfortable. But on the other side of it is something I hadn't felt in years. Room to breathe. Room to be seen. Room to be, fully and without apology, yourself.